All right, this is Chat UTD, and let's talk about Dan Ashworth and him no longer being at Manchester United. To state the obvious, it's a weird one, um, given the amount of upheaval it caused to get him. Not just for Newcastle, I don't care about them, but for us. Um, the amount of money it cost, I think we had to go through court to make sure that he didn't fulfil his whole gardening leave that was supposed to be 18 months, I think, and we cut it down to 6 months. But from January until July, whatever it was, he was unable to start for us, and that's been given as a reason / excuse for us not being as ruthless as we probably could have been with the manager. I think I've seen in certain quarters it being given as a reason as to why maybe there wasn't quite the clear out that we would like, because Ashworth wasn't in the building quick enough, and then a few months later he's no longer there. I purposely didn't do a video yesterday because I knew more stuff would come out and I wanted more information really before I start making any assumptions. And there's reputable people like Fabrizio Romano and The Athletic saying similar things, like Sir Jim basically not impressed with Dan Ashworth, that he wanted to go for an English coach. Depending on what you read, I've heard Southgate, I've heard Potter, I've heard Eddie Howe as his preferable replacements to Eric Ten Hag. That on its own sets alarm bells off, and I think gives credence to the decision that they've let him go. Suggestions of tension between him and Sir Jim. I suppose in complete fairness, we look at it in a very black and white way, football fans, don't we? And we think that I'm of the generation where it's like the FIFA generation, where you can just look at a player or a person and say they've got 80 something rating, let's get them in, they're going to be perfect. Dan Ashworth would have had a 87 rating as a sporting director or director of football, but you don't know until you get them through the door what they're going to be like. You don't know what your working relationship is going to be like with them. By the time Sir Jim would have started to build connections with Dan Ashworth, obviously whilst he was on gardening leave, I bet the contract had already been signed. So they've gone off reputation, and he's got a very good reputation. And it's not until you start working with that person that you know whether or not they're going to be compatible with what you want. So, you know, I understand that can happen. The problem, I think, in terms of this whole vision that United have, is that you can't. They've only made one decision on one person, but it's a slight concern projecting to the future that you can't keep changing components of that vision, or the vision itself will keep changing slightly, because the people in charge of the vision, of course, are massively pivotal in it working or not. And we were told in February by Sir Jim that he was putting the emphasis on people like Dan Ashworth and Omar Barada to set the vision of the club, this game model that we have a set of principles that the whole club abides by, and we make appointments that align with those principles and with those values, and that we create a bit of a DNA. And Ashworth was massive in that. At that time, he was supposed to be massive in it anyway. And obviously, he's not there anymore. So you replace him, I suppose, with someone who you think fits that a little bit better. You could look at it that way. But if you keep changing the personalities of the people that are in the roles, then the vision itself keeps shifting, and that vision's got to be absolutely rock solid. And maybe it is, and that's why they've let him go. But this talk of the guy from PSG, Campos, this talk of Berta, I think he's called, from Atletico Madrid. Again, these are all names of great repute, but if we're going off reputation, Dan Ashworth had a really good reputation. Looking at INEOS and what they did at Nice, they're not scared of failing their way to success. And I don't know if that's it's probably a good and a bad thing, but you know, that kind of like, right, we'll appoint someone, don't fit the vision, get rid of them. Appoint someone else, don't fit the vision, get rid of them. Maybe that you could call that ruthless, you can call it haphazard. It's not a great look, but if ultimately, I suppose, you get to the right person, then do we accept what we're going to have to accept, that, aren't we? I'm not an advocate, particularly when I think about managers these days, of just saying, right, that manager needs 5 years. You know, we need to be ruthless. We need to be of the of a reputation where we say that person's not doing it. If it's after a year, it's after 18 months, you get rid of them. You don't compound a bad appointment by keeping them. The problems get worse, and then after 2 years, 2.5 years, you do what you should have done after 1 year, and the problems are deeper entrenched, and you've got more repair to do. We've done that with managers. So on the one hand, I'm like, right, good. It's good that we've let him go if we don't think he's the right person for the job. But on the other hand, and I'm projecting to the future, if this continues to be a feature of what INEOS do, which if you look at Nice, it probably is, there's a lot of upheaval coming, and there's a lot of trial and error and suck it and see. And I'm not sure whether that will work. It did make me think maybe, well, probably definitely, Sir Jim Ratcliffe is setting the vision. But the problem with that is, what if he's setting the wrong one? What's his reputation in football? He can't get sacked, can he? So if this game model's based on Sir Jim Ratcliffe's ideals and values and principles, what if his ideals and values and principles aren't the right ones? Then we're screwed, aren't we? So it brings up a lot of questions. I think I said a couple of weeks ago, Amrin was the last piece of the INEOS jigsaw. So now we can start assessing them. Because they had Sir Jim Ratcliffe, David Brailsford, Jean-Claude Blanc. It's kind of like the hierarchy, the INEOS hierarchy. And then you've got Omar Barada, Dan Ashworth, Vivell, and Wilcox. And then Ten Hag wasn't an INEOS person. So they've replaced Ten Hag with an INEOS person. But now there's a great chasm there where there's someone else needed in a very, very important role. Or maybe they feel they can. There's a lot. One of my concerns, actually, just deviating slightly, was that too many cooks spoil the broth. Maybe with all of those people, perhaps that role can be divvied out between them. Maybe you don't need an explicit director of football when you've got that many people on what I would call a football board. So maybe they don't need to replace him. But on the face of it, it looks like there's a big gap. One of my concerns, and I've said it many times with United, is that it's always tomorrow. It's always promises of tomorrow. It's always next summer that's going to be the big summer. It's always the next transfer window that's going to be the transformative one. I don't want this to be used as an excuse now for us not to do what we need to do and be ruthless and cutthroat, more with outgoings and incomings. They must have a plan moving forward. I'm sure Amrin's going to form part of that plan in terms of who we need to get rid of, particularly in the summer, more so than January. I don't want this to be used as an excuse, or we couldn't really do what we needed to do because we didn't have a director of football because Dan Ashworth left. They must be in the process now of making that plan. And maybe Dan Ashworth has been let go partially because they're not impressed with what he said as part of that plan. So just go ahead with the plans that are there anyway. We've got to, at some point, clear the decks and get players that suit these principles, values, DNA, this game model. Because the ones we've got now don't really. Just like the people that INEOS have brought in to scaffold everything above the team, just like the manager previously didn't fit what they wanted, these players don't fit what they want. If we brought a manager in that wants players to run, that wants them to be humble, that wants them to be team first, that wants them to be mouldable and coachable, you look throughout the team and say, as much as we can like or dislike players, I think the one thing we would have to concede is that these players probably are none of that. And in which case we need to make changes. I felt in the summer that we changed around the problem rather than the problem itself. We brought new coaches in rather than sack the manager. We brought new coaches in rather than get rid of a number of players that probably needed to go. We did release players, but for me, they weren't a problem, the ones that we released. They weren't, fair enough, Sancho and Greenwood, I think they're no-brainers. But other than that, we didn't make any decisions that made me go, that they mean business kind of thing. It was easy sales to make. And I hope that letting Ashworth go isn't another example of changing around the actual problem. At some point, there needs to be a cull. I do want to clarify, though, what I mean by this cull, because there's many people in fan channels and stuff like that, and on social media, who are sort of, I don't know if they're making a point that agrees with my thoughts, but just doing it in a slightly different way, or whether they're coming at it from a slightly different angle. But I keep seeing people quoting Ralph Rangnick and open heart surgery, and I keep seeing people saying these players. And again, I want to clarify what I mean when I say a cull. The open heart surgery does need to happen at Man United, but it's a completely different open heart surgery to the one that Ralph Rangnick didn't demand, but suggested 3 years ago, because the players are entirely different. Look at the starting 11 on Saturday. Onana, Martinez, De Ligt, Yoro, Ugarte, all Ten Hag signings. Mainoo was promoted by Ten Hag. Garnacho was promoted by Ten Hag, and Rasmus was signed by Ten Hag. So 8 of the first 11 are either Ten Hag signings or youngsters that have been brought through under Ten Hag's on Ten Hag's watch. The other 3 are Ahmad, who is at the moment the shining light in the team, Bruno, who's the captain, and Dalot, who for me would be on a list of players I probably would let go. So we're not looking at a team full of players who have been here for years, who have let manager after manager down, or were even part of the conversation that Ralph Rangnick was talking about when he said that that we needed open heart surgery. And I think people they're throwing that comment out there without really thinking about it. The point is, I still think those people are right. We do need a cull. We do need open heart surgery, but it's not as easy as you might think, because so many of the players that we're talking about are very new to the club and are on contracts that they've signed not that long ago, where they're on very good money, and it's going to be very difficult for us to get rid of them. So if I think about who I would like to leave, who I think is necessary to leave, I'd say the biggest one's Rashford. The biggest symbolic sacrificial lamb, if you like, that we need to say, right, that's the statement exit. It's Rashford, without question. So him. But then you do have like players that I haven't really got a massive problem with, but do need to leave. You've got Lindelof, Maguire, Eriksen, Casemiro, Shaw. So there's 6 there, including Rashford. I'd say probably Dalot as well, so there's 7. But when I look through the team that started on Saturday, I'm not necessarily looking at them thinking they're a bunch of toss. They are. They're not bad players. I just think we need better players. But those are the 6 I think I would say we absolutely need to get rid of. If we got rid of those 6 or 7 with Dalot, you've got a skeleton squad there then, who aren't good enough, as they're showing. But you can't get rid of everybody, so the others for me would stay. And again, they've only been here a short period of time, so they're harder to get rid of. But then I'd be looking at, what do we need then? So I'd say what we need, looking at it from my perspective, I think we need a centre forward. I think we need a left wing back. We need a centre back. And then ideally, I think we need a centre midfield player who will boss it, who will be like the main guy in the middle of the park. But that's a luxury I don't think we're gonna get. And I think we probably need another person to play in behind the number 10 and in behind the striker, like the number 10 or inside forward role. I think we probably need another one of them. But again, we've got a lot of players who can play there, and they're not good enough. But I think we need another one. I think the key areas are left wing back, centre forward, and centre back. So let's say you get those 3. They need to be infinitely better than the players we've currently got. They need to drag the standards of the team up. They can't be of the same level, because the level we've got now is not good enough. if we got rid of the 6 or 7 I was talking about, I would replace the gaps in the squad then with youth. I'd be looking at Jack Fletcher. I'd be looking at Obi Martin, who we brought in from Arsenal in the summer. I'd be looking at Kone, who we brought in from the summer. I'd be looking at those players because they're worth investing in. I don't know if it's the under 18s or the under 21s. One of those age groups is doing really well, and the other one's struggling a little bit. But I can't remember which way around it is. But one of them's just absolutely romping it every week, and they're of an age, even if they're under 18s, they're of an age where you can start to filter them in there. And to talk about DNA, that's Man United. That's the Busby Babes. That's the Fergie Fledglings. It's the class of '92. It's like that's what we are made of. That's our history. And young players won't let you down. They're mouldable, they're coachable, they're hungry. And United fans would 100% get behind that. So I'd like to see an influx of young players and build around that. And it's not going to be perfect, but the one thing the last few years has taught me is you can sign a player based on a projection of what they're going to be like because of what they've been like at the club that they're at. But coming to Man United is just a completely different kettle of fish. Like, not dissimilar to what I mentioned before with Dan Ashworth. You can look at him as a director of football where he has been before and his reputation, and say, right, he's an 87 out of 100 director of football, so you bring him in. It doesn't fit because of his personality. With players, it's a bit different. But if a player comes in, first of all, they're walking into a dressing room full of mediocrity, full of players that have been over-rewarded for underperforming for too long. A culture of rewarding mediocrity. That's a massive problem when you walk into a dressing room and that's the culture. The highest paid player is one of the worst players in the team with the worst work ethic. Massive issue. The zombie effect, as I've called it before. The other thing is, when you play for United, it's a goldfish bowl. And that shirt's heavy. You can either wear it or you can't. Look at Mazraoui. He's the opposite. When Mazraoui came in the summer, I thought he's all right. Didn't think anything of it really. Thought I didn't want us to get rid of Wan-Bissaka, and I thought it was a bit of a pointless signing based on what I knew of him. I don't think any of us thought he was going to be as good as he's been and as consistent as he's been. He's Mr. Versatile. He's Mr. Consistent. He never lets you down. He's strong. He's humble. He's got a great temperament. He's kind of like a modern day Dennis Irwin. Now, he probably hasn't earned that yet, because I remember when Wan-Bissaka first came in his first season, we were all lauding him and saying how fantastic he was, and that wasn't the opinion a year or two later. So maybe I've given Mazraoui too much too soon there, but certainly on the face of it, he's everything you want in a player. But we wouldn't have projected that to be the case. But it works in reverse, unfortunately, more so for United, where you get a player and you think that he could be a pretty promising signing, and then they're just not. And it's so difficult to get it right when the culture they're walking into is so poor. So this is a long-term problem, and it's going to take a long-term solution. It's going to take a long time to get it right. My point, bringing it back to young players, is they're already at the club. They've been brought up at the club. So I'm not saying you don't buy anyone, but you bring young players in alongside, hopefully, a few good role models that are already there, or that we can bring in alongside them. And hopefully that might be something you can work with. And I think, going back to the point I just made about players and not, never being too sure about what you're going to get from them, I wonder if that's why we've ended up going down the line of, or managers have gone down the line of, Ibrahimovic, Cavani, Ronaldo, because as much as they're coming towards the end of their career and want a big payday, you know what you're going to get from them. You know their temperament, particularly with Ibrahimovic, just an absolute winner who isn't going to take any nonsense. Cavani probably, and Ronaldo, you question their temperament slightly, but you know what you're going to get in terms of the role, that their leadership, their role model presence on the pitch. But you can't keep doing that with 35, 36-year-olds, obviously. So you go the other end for me and bring younger players in. I know the last few minutes have been talking about sort of the overall picture at the club, but I think Ashworth ties into that, in that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the squad, and these key decisions that need to be made. You'd think a director of football would be part of that, and he's not there anymore. So I don't want that to be used as an excuse, because so much work needs to be done on the squad. so much improvement has to happen. We are so far away from where we want to be, and we've got to stick with what we're doing with Amrin. We have to go through the pain. I think these we've had too many false dawns. We've had too many times where we've papered over the cracks. Let's not paper over the cracks. Let's let everything hang out, for want of a better expression. Let's highlight and identify the problems, and then hopefully he's got the autonomy to solve those problems. Because for me, as I said before, there's a few dead ducks in that team that I mentioned there. There's 6 of them. Dallow's not that, but probably you could let him go. You've then got to replace them, and so many others who are probably not good enough, but you're going to find it very difficult to get rid of them because they've been signed within the last 2 or 3 years. Big job, not just for Amrin, but for INEOS. The Ashworth thing, 2 ways of looking at it, as I said. Ruthless, not wasting time. The other way of looking at it is you keep changing the components of the vision. It's going to be hard to make that vision what you would want. Or maybe they're very clear at what they want with that vision. He didn't fit it, and they know someone else who they think will. But I think they will end up, if they're going to be successful, I wonder if they're going to fail their way to success. Glazers out.